They burned her supply shack in the middle of a moonless desert night. The flames devoured water, ammunition, radio, everything she needed to survive. As the attackers withdrew, they believed she would die before sunrise. But desert dawn brings more than light. It brings wind,
Sniper!
it brings
Get
distance,
cover!
and it brings a
Move!
sniper who has never missed. When the sun touched the
Go, go, go!
horizon,
Right
a
side!
single shot rang out, and everything reversed. Lieutenant Sarah Brennan had been alone at Outpost Kilo 7 for 43 days. The supply shack sat in a depression between two ridges, 50 miles from the nearest Allied position. Command called it a strategic monitoring point. Sarah called it what it was: a concrete box with tin walls, positioned to watch a valley the enemy needed to cross. Nobody expected action here. The war had moved north months ago. That assumption died at 0247 hours. Sarah woke to the smell before the sound: gasoline, sharp and chemical, cutting through the dry desert air. Her hand moved to the rifle beside her cot. Training overrode the confusion of sleep. The first explosion came from the storage annex. Orange light flooded through the shack's single window. Sarah rolled off the cot as the second charge detonated. The roof groaned. Metal shrieked against metal. She grabbed her rifle, her boots, her jacket. Nothing else mattered. The door was already hot when she kicked it open. Flames climbed the eastern wall, feeding on the wooden supports she'd reinforced last week. Black smoke poured from the annex where she'd stored ammunition, water canisters, the long-range radio, everything. Sarah ran. The heat chased her across 20 yards of open ground. She dove behind a burnt-out truck chassis, a wreck from some previous conflict, half buried in sand. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Behind her, the shack erupted. The ammunition started cooking off. Rounds cracked in the fire like breaking bones. Tracers spiraled into the dark sky. Sarah pressed her face into the sand, tasting grit and ash. She counted the detonations, estimated the burn rate, calculated losses. 600 rounds of 7.62 millimeters ammunition, gone. 40 liters of water, gone. The radio that connected her to command, gone. The flares, the medical kit, the spare barrel for her rifle, gone. When the explosions finally stopped, Sarah lifted her head. The shack was a skeleton of twisted metal and collapsed walls. Flames still licked at the wreckage, but the main structure had fallen in on itself. Embers drifted on the night wind like dying fireflies. Sarah's hands shook. Not from fear, from rage. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Someone had mapped this position, observed her routine, waited for the right moment. They'd used accelerant, placed charges at structural points. This was professional work. She checked her rifle. The Remington M24 was intact, scope undamaged. She had the 20 rounds in the magazine, plus 2 spare magazines in her jacket pockets. 60 rounds total. Her canteen held maybe half a liter. The temperature would hit 115 degrees by midday. Sarah looked at the burning shack, then at the darkness beyond the firelight. Somewhere out there, the people who did this were watching, waiting to see if she'd run, if she'd panic. She did neither. Sarah retreated into the deeper shadow of the wrecked truck and began to think. The desert turned cold after the fire died. Sarah sat with her back against the truck's rusted frame, rifle across her knees. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 2 hours. Her breath misted in the air. She pulled her jacket tighter and focused on staying alert. The shack smoldered. Occasional pops and hisses came from the wreckage as metal contracted in the cooling air. The smell of burnt plastic and scorched metal hung over everything. Sarah inventoried what she had. Rifle, functional. Ammunition, 60 rounds. Water, half a liter, maybe less. Food, 2 protein bars in her jacket pocket. Radio destroyed. Shelter, none. Extraction, impossible without radio contact. She wasn't afraid of dying. Fear was useless, but she needed to understand who had attacked her and why. Sarah moved carefully around the perimeter of the burnt shack, keeping low. The attackers had approached from the northwest. She could see the drag marks in the sand, where they'd hauled the fuel canisters. Boot prints led away in the same direction, back toward the ridgeline. She counted the tracks. 4 individuals, possibly 5. Military boots, probably surplus. The stride patterns suggested training. These weren't irregulars or opportunists. This was a reconnaissance team. But reconnaissance for what? Sarah crouched beside the clearest set of prints. The tread pattern was distinctive Russian manufacture, commonly used by proxy forces in the region. The depth of the impressions suggested someone carrying heavy equipment, not just fuel for the fire, something else. She followed the tracks for 50 yards until they disappeared onto rocky ground. There, she found what she was looking for, a cigarette butt, still faintly warm. They'd waited here, watched the shack burn, made sure of their work before withdrawing. Sarah crushed the cigarette under her boot and looked toward the ridge line. Standard procedure after destroying a forward observation post was to verify the kill or withdrawal. If they didn't find her body in the wreckage, they'd return. They had to. An active enemy combatant this close to their operational corridor was unacceptable. They'd come back at dawn. First light gave the best visibility for confirming casualties while minimizing exposure time. Sarah checked her watch. 0422 hours. 2 hours until sunrise. She could run, attempt an overland extraction toward Allied lines. 50 miles through open desert with half a liter of water. She'd be dead by noon. She could hide, wait for them to search the wreckage, slip away when they left. Possible, but unlikely to succeed. Trained reconnaissance teams didn't leave loose ends. Or she could do what she did best. Sarah returned to the burnt truck and began preparing her position. She'd spent 6 years as a designated marksman before volunteering for forward observation duty. Before that, 2 years on her high school rifle team in Montana. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 9 years old, hunting elk in the mountains above their ranch. "Distance is your friend," he used to say. "Patience is your weapon. Everything else is just equipment." Sarah had never forgotten that lesson. She cleared a shallow depression in the sand 30 yards southeast of the burnt shack, positioned so the rising sun would be at her back. The position offered a clear line of sight to the northwestern approach, the direction they'd come from, the direction they'd return. She used debris from the wreckage to create a minimal hide. Nothing elaborate, just enough to break up her outline in the low light of dawn. Then she settled in to wait. The desert breathed around her, wind whispered across the sand. Somewhere in the distance, a wild dog called to its pack. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent. Sarah's hands were steady on the rifle. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. Sarah used the remaining darkness to reconstruct everything she knew about her attackers. They'd approached during the dead hours between midnight and 0300, the period when human alertness drops to its lowest point, smart. They'd used fire instead of explosives for the initial attack, which meant they wanted to deny her resources, not just kill her. That suggested they planned to use this position themselves after she was gone. The choice of gasoline as an accelerant was telling. It burned hot and fast, maximizing psychological impact, but it also meant they'd had to carry it in, which limited their operational range. They had a base camp within 5 miles, probably less. Sarah marked the northwestern ridgeline in her mind. The terrain beyond dropped into a shallow valley perfect for concealment with multiple exit routes. If she were planning an observation post, that's where she'd put it. The team composition bothered her. 4 to 5 individuals was larger than necessary for a sabotage operation. That suggested either excessive caution or a secondary objective. Given their thoroughness, Sarah suspected the latter. They were mapping Allied positions. Outpost Kilo 7 was supposed to be a secret. Its existence wasn't on any official registry. Command had placed it specifically to monitor enemy movement through the valley without detection. If the enemy knew about this post, they knew about others. Someone had talked, or someone had been very, very patient in their reconnaissance. Sarah examined the burn patterns on the shack's remains. The charges had been placed at the support columns and the ammunition storage. Professional placement, military precision. This wasn't militia work. These were trained soldiers, probably special forces or their equivalent, which meant they wouldn't make the mistake of assuming she was dead without confirmation. Sarah traced probable approach routes in her mind. The northwestern ridge offered the best combination of cover and observation. They'd use it again. The question was where, exactly, they'd position themselves for the verification sweep. She studied the terrain in the growing pre-dawn light. The ridge had 3 distinct high points. The western point offered the widest field of view, but required a longer approach. The eastern point was closer, but had limited sight lines. The center point, the one Sarah would choose, balanced both factors. From the center point, an observer with binoculars could examine the entire area around the burnt shack. It was also the position that would catch the first direct sunlight at dawn, which meant anyone stationed there would have the sun at their back for the first critical minutes. They'd expect her to be dead or gone. They wouldn't expect return fire from a position they'd already destroyed. Overconfidence was Sarah's advantage. She adjusted her hide slightly, ensuring her line of sight to the center ridge point was unobstructed. The range was approximately 847 yards. She'd paced it out mentally, using landmarks and her knowledge of the terrain. At that distance, with her rifle and ammunition, she had one chance. Maybe two if she was lucky. Wind would be the critical factor. Desert winds at dawn were unpredictable. Thermal currents rose as the sun heated the sand, creating swirling patterns that could deflect a bullet by several inches. Sarah would have to time her shot perfectly. Wait for the wind to settle, wait for the target to present itself, wait for the moment when everything aligned. She'd done it before. In training, she'd consistently hit targets at 1,000 yards. In combat, her longest confirmed kill was 723 yards. This would be between those two marks. Difficult, but possible. Sarah checked her rifle 0. The scope was calibrated for this exact scenario. Long range, desert conditions, dawn light. She verified the adjustment turrets were set correctly, accounting for the expected temperature and altitude. Everything was ready. Now she just had to survive until they returned. The sun rose at 0614 hours. Sarah had been in position for 90 minutes. The cold had seeped into her bones. Her muscles ached from remaining motionless. Her lips were cracked. Her tongue felt thick in her mouth. She allowed herself 3 small sips from her canteen. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was enough to keep her functional. Dehydration was already setting in. Sarah recognized the symptoms: dry mouth, slight dizziness, the beginning of a headache behind her eyes. In 6 hours, it would become severe. In 12, critical. She needed to end this fast. The heat began building as the sun climbed. The sand around her position started radiating warmth. Soon it would be unbearable. The thermal currents would rise in visible waves, distorting everything beyond 400 yards. Sarah had trained in these conditions. She knew how to account for heat distortion when aiming, knew how to read the mirage patterns, how to wait for the brief moments of clarity when the air settled. But training and reality were different. Training didn't include dehydration, exhaustion, and the knowledge that one missed shot meant death. Her position was brutal. The minimal hide offered no shade. Direct sunlight hammered down on her back and neck. Sweat gathered under her jacket, but she didn't remove it. The insulation would help when the temperature peaked. Sarah controlled her breathing. Slow, steady, conserving water through respiration discipline. Every breath released moisture. Every breath counted. Her hands remained on the rifle, finger outside the trigger guard, safety engaged. Professional habits overrode discomfort. The burnt shack was 60 yards to her northwest. The wreckage had stopped smoking, reduced to twisted metal and ash. Nothing moved except the heat shimmer rising from the ruins. To the casual observer, the site was abandoned, destroyed, mission accomplished. Sarah was counting on that assumption. She'd positioned herself in a slight depression, using the natural contour of the land to minimize her profile. The debris she'd arranged around her hide created just enough visual disruption. From the ridgeline, she'd be invisible unless someone was specifically looking for her. And they wouldn't be. They'd be looking at the shack. The thermal currents were building now. Sarah could see them clearly, rippling bands of distortion that made the desert landscape waver like water. This was the dangerous period. Any shot through this thermal layer would be unpredictable. She needed to wait until the air settled. There was a brief window each morning after sunrise when the temperature equalized and the thermals temporarily stabilized. It lasted maybe 5 minutes. That would be her opportunity. Sarah's vision blurred slightly. She blinked to clear it, but the sensation remained. Early-stage dehydration affecting her eyes. Not critical yet, but getting worse. She took another small sip of water. The canteen was nearly empty now. Maybe 2 more sips left. After that, nothing. Sarah pushed the thought aside and focused on her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, controlled, conserving energy and moisture. The sun continued climbing. The temperature was 97 degrees and rising. Sarah didn't move. They appeared at 0647 hours, exactly as Sarah had predicted. 4 figures crested the center point of the northwestern ridge. They moved carefully but without excessive caution, the confident movement of professionals who believed their mission was complete. Sarah watched them through her scope. The first man carried binoculars. He was scanning the burn site, methodical and thorough. Behind him, 3 others spread out in a loose formation. All carried rifles. All wore tactical gear in desert camouflage patterns. The lead man, the one with the binoculars, was the commander. Sarah could tell by the way the others positioned themselves relative to him, maintaining fields of fire while deferring to his observation. He was also the target. Remove the commander, and the team lost cohesion. Standard tactics. First shot, best shot. Sarah tracked him through the scope as he moved along the ridgeline. Range, 847 yards. Wind, light, variable from the northwest. Temperature, 101 degrees and rising. Thermal distortion, moderate and building. Not ideal conditions, but workable. The commander stopped at the exact position Sarah had anticipated. He raised the binoculars and began a systematic scan of the area, starting from the left, moving right across the burn site. Sarah watched his body language, relaxed shoulders, casual stance. He wasn't expecting trouble. Behind him, one of the other men laughed a sharp bark that carried clearly across the distance. He said something Sarah couldn't hear, gesturing at the burnt shack. Another man responded, also laughing. They thought she was dead. Sarah's breathing remained steady. Slow inhale, slow exhale, heart rate controlled. The commander lowered the binoculars and looked back at his team. He was saying something, giving orders. Two of the men started down the ridge toward the burn site, probably to confirm there was no body in the wreckage, to search for any intelligence value in the debris. The commander and the fourth man remained on the ridge. This was it. The moment was approaching. Sarah checked the wind. The thermal currents were still building, but there was a pattern to them, a rhythm. Every 90 seconds or so, the air settled for perhaps 10 seconds before the next thermal wave rose. She would have to time her shot perfectly within that window. Sarah settled deeper into her position. The rifle stock was firm against her shoulder. Her left hand supported the forend, steady as stone. Her right hand gripped the pistol grip, finger moving to the trigger. The commander raised the binoculars again. He was performing a second sweep, more careful this time. Professional paranoia. Never assume. Sarah watched him through the scope, crosshairs centered on his chest. At this range, she'd aim for center mass. Headshots were too risky with the thermal distortion. The two men reached the burn site and began picking through the wreckage. One of them kicked at a piece of twisted metal. The other circled the perimeter. The commander watched them work. His body language was patient, thorough. He wasn't going to leave until he was satisfied. Sarah waited. The thermal currents rippled across her view. The commander's image wavered in the scope. 90 seconds since the last clear window. Another one was coming. She controlled her breathing. In, out, in, out. The wind shifted slightly. Northwest to north, approximately 4 miles per hour. Sarah adjusted her aim 0.2 inches left to compensate. 80 seconds. The commander lowered the binoculars. He was speaking into a radio now, reporting back to whoever had sent him. Mission accomplished. Target destroyed. No hostile contact. 70 seconds. Sarah's finger touched the trigger. Light pressure. Not enough to fire. Just making contact. Preparing. 60 seconds. One of the men at the burn site shouted something. He was holding up a piece of equipment looked like part of the destroyed radio, showing it to the commander. The commander nodded, satisfied. 50 seconds. Sarah's breathing slowed even further. Her heart rate dropped. She entered the zone she'd learned to access during years of training, the place where time stretched and the world narrowed to just the scope, the target, the shot. 40 seconds. The thermal currents were beginning to settle. The wavering in her scope view was lessening. The commander's image became clearer. 30 seconds. Sarah made her final adjustments. Windage set. Elevation confirmed. Distance verified. 20 seconds. The commander was standing in profile now, still holding the radio. Perfect shot presentation. Maximum target area. 15 seconds. The air cleared. The thermal currents paused. Sarah's view through the scope crystallized with perfect clarity. 10 seconds. The commander shifted his weight. He was preparing to move, to descend from the ridge and join his men at the burn site. Sarah stopped breathing. 5 seconds. Her finger increased pressure on the trigger. Smooth, steady. 3 seconds. The wind dropped to nothing. Complete calm. 2 seconds. The crosshairs were perfectly aligned. Center mass, 847 yards. 1 second. Sarah squeezed the trigger. The rifle recoiled against Sarah's shoulder, a familiar pressure, absorbed through practiced muscle memory. The sound of the shot rolled across the desert, flat and hard. Through the scope, Sarah watched the bullet fly. Time compressed. The round traveled at 2,550 feet per second, but Sarah saw every moment of its trajectory. Years of experience taught her to track the shot, to know instinctively if she'd made the hit. The bullet crossed 847 yards of superheated desert air. It passed through the brief window of thermal stability Sarah had waited for. At the last possible moment, the wind changed. A tiny shift, less than 1 mile per hour from true north to northeast. The bullet drifted. 1 inch, 2 inches. Sarah's brain calculated the correction even as the round flew. She'd aimed for center mass. The drift would move the impact point right. Still within the kill zone, but barely. The commander jerked backward. The bullet struck him high in the chest, just below the right collarbone. Not the perfect center mass shot Sarah had planned, but effective. The round's energy transferred through his torso, spinning him half around before he collapsed. He was dead before he hit the ground. Sarah cycled the bolt, smooth, automatic, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a new round. She didn't waste time confirming the kill. The commander was down. That was enough. The other 3 men were reacting now. 2 seconds of shock, then chaos. The man who'd been standing beside the commander dropped flat, searching for cover that didn't exist on the exposed ridge. The 2 men at the burn site were spinning, trying to locate the shooter. Sarah shifted her aim to the man on the ridge. Range, 843 yards. Wind, northeast, 2 miles per hour. Target, prone, presenting minimal profile. Difficult shot. Sarah waited 3 seconds. The man raised his head, trying to see where his commander had fallen. Fatal mistake. The second shot cracked across the desert. This round flew true. No wind drift. The bullet struck the man in the upper spine. He went limp instantly, nervous system severed. 2 down. Sarah cycled the bolt again. Movement smooth, professional, no hesitation. The remaining 2 men at the burn site were running now. One sprinted toward the ridge, trying to reach cover. The other dove behind the burnt truck chassis, the same position Sarah had used the night before. The runner was exposed. Full sprint, range, approximately 320 yards and closing. Sarah led him by 2 feet, accounting for his speed and direction. Squeezed the trigger. The third shot caught him in mid-stride. He tumbled forward, momentum carrying him another 3 yards before he stopped moving. 3 down. The 4th man was behind the truck. Smart position. Good cover. He'd be difficult to hit from Sarah's current angle, but he'd also trapped himself. Sarah held her position and waited. Rifle trained on the truck. Finger on the trigger. Ready. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. The man behind the truck didn't move. He was probably radioing for help, trying to understand what had just happened. His entire team had been destroyed in less than 15 seconds. Sarah checked her sight picture. The angle wasn't perfect, but she could see a sliver of space beneath the truck chassis. If he shifted position, if he moved even slightly. 40 seconds. The man's voice carried across the distance, shouting something in a language Sarah didn't recognize. Panic. Fear. He was calling out to his dead teammates. 50 seconds. Movement. The man was repositioning, trying to get a better view of the ridge where his commander had fallen. His leg extended beyond the truck's cover. Just 6 inches. Just for a moment. Sarah fired. The bullet struck his calf. Bone shattered. The man screamed. He pulled back behind the truck, but the damage was done. He was wounded, immobile, and alone. Sarah had 4 rounds left in the magazine, 56 total remaining. She ejected the magazine and replaced it with a fresh one from her jacket. 20 rounds now. The wounded magazine went back into her pocket. The man behind the truck had stopped screaming. He was probably applying pressure to the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Standard combat first aid. Sarah could wait him out. The heat would do the work for her. Wounded, losing blood, no water, he'd be unconscious within 2 hours. But she needed to verify the kills. Needed to ensure none of them could report back. Sarah made her decision. She rose from her hide position and began moving. Sarah approached from the east, using the sun's angle to keep her backlit to anyone looking her direction. The wounded man behind the truck didn't see her until she was 30 yards away. He raised his rifle, a jerky, desperate movement. Sarah dropped flat as he fired. The rounds went high, panic shooting. He was using his rifle one-handed, the other hand still applying pressure to his shattered leg. Sarah centered her crosshairs and fired once. The man slumped. 4 for 4. Sarah rose and moved to the truck, rifle ready. She confirmed the kill with a quick check, no pulse, no breathing. Then she moved to verify the others. The man she'd hit at 320 yards was definitely dead. The round had struck center mass, just as intended. The 2 on the ridge were also gone. The commander had taken the bullet through the chest cavity. The second man's spine shot had been instantly fatal. Sarah searched their bodies quickly and professionally. She took their water 4 canteens, all full. Took their ammunition 2 magazines compatible with her rifle. Took their radio. The radio was military grade, encrypted. Sarah turned it on and listened. Static. Then a voice, speaking in the same language she'd heard the wounded man shout. Someone was calling for a status report, asking for confirmation. Sarah turned the radio off. They'd know soon enough that their team was gone. She checked her watch. 0703 hours. The entire engagement had lasted 16 minutes from first shot to final confirmation. 16 minutes to eliminate a 4-man reconnaissance team and secure this position. Sarah allowed herself one long drink from a captured canteen. The water was warm but clean. She drained half the bottle, rehydrating as quickly as her body would safely allow. The relief was immediate. Her headache faded. Her vision cleared. She refilled her personal canteen and distributed the others in her jacket pockets. The ammunition she added to her tactical vest. She now had 96 rounds total. Not enough for a prolonged engagement, but sufficient for what she needed. Sarah looked at the bodies, then at the burn site, then at the ridgeline. The enemy knew this position now. They'd known it before the attack. That meant others would come, either reinforcements for this team or a follow-up force to investigate when the team didn't report. Sarah had maybe 6 hours before the next contact. She needed to make them count. The radio crackled again. The voice was more insistent now, demanding a response. Sarah crushed the radio under her boot and scattered the pieces. Then she began preparing her defense. They sent a patrol at 1,320 hours. Sarah had been watching the northwestern approach for 3 hours. She'd repositioned twice, creating multiple fighting positions around the perimeter of the burn site. Each position had clear fields of fire, emergency egress routes, and cached ammunition. The new patrol was larger, 8 men. Moving in a tactical formation, they approached carefully, weapons ready. They'd found the bodies. Sarah watched them through her scope from a position 180 yards southeast of the burn site. Different angle than her morning engagement. Different everything. The patrol commander was easy to identify. He moved at the center of the formation, protected by his men. Smart. He'd learned from what happened to the first team, but he'd made a critical mistake. He'd brought his entire force into the kill zone at once. Sarah let them reach the bodies. Let them spread out to investigate. Let them believe they were in control of the situation. The thermal distortion was severe. Now it was 118 degrees, and the air rippled in visible waves. But Sarah had planned for this. She'd marked her targets when they first entered her field of view, memorizing their positions relative to fixed landmarks. When they stopped moving, she was ready. Sarah fired at the leftmost man in the formation. Range, 192 yards. Through thermal distortion. The bullet struck low, caught him in the hip instead of center mass. He went down screaming. The others scattered, exactly as Sarah predicted. 3 men ran north toward the ridge. 2 dove behind the burnt truck. 1 went flat in the open. The commander and 1 other retreated south, trying to create distance. Sarah shifted to the 3 running for the ridge. She fired twice. Both shots missed. The thermal distortion was too severe for moving targets. But the misses had their intended effect. The 3 men changed direction, breaking formation. 1 went east, 1 went west. 1 stopped completely, frozen by indecision. The frozen one died. Sarah's 3rd shot found him despite the heat shimmer. The patrol was scattered now, cohesion destroyed. They didn't know where Sarah was, didn't know how many shooters they faced, didn't know anything except their friends were dying. Sarah moved. She abandoned her position and sprinted to the next fighting position 95 yards northwest. She covered the distance in 14 seconds and dropped into the prepared hide. From this angle, she could see the 2 men behind the truck. They were radioing, calling for support, describing the attack. Their voices carried in the still air, high-pitched, panicked. Sarah waited, controlled her breathing, let her heart rate settle. The commander was shouting orders now, trying to restore control. He was telling his men to hold position, to identify the threat, to return coordinated fire. But the men weren't listening. Fear had taken over. They were individuals now, not a unit. One of the men behind the truck broke and ran, just stood up and sprinted south, abandoning his position and his teammate. Sarah let him go. Chase 1 rabbit, lose the others. The remaining man behind the truck was alone now. Sarah could see him clearly crouched, weapon ready, eyes wide. He was young, maybe 22, scared. She didn't want to kill him, but he was armed, and he was enemy. Sarah centered her crosshairs and fired. The young man dropped. 6 down, 2 wounded, 2 retreating. Sarah moved again, different position, different angle, keep them guessing. The commander had stopped retreating. He was making a stand behind a small rock outcropping. trying to rally whoever was left. His voice was hoarse from shouting. No one answered him. The desert had swallowed his patrol, 8 men reduced to fragments in less than 10 minutes. Sarah could have pressed the attack, could have hunted down the survivors one by one. Instead, she stopped shooting. She let the silence return. Let them wonder if it was over. Let them imagine how many enemies they faced. Let fear do the rest of the work. The helicopters arrived at 1,647 hours. Sarah heard them before she saw them, the distinctive thump of rotor blades echoing across the desert. 2 UA-60 Black Hawks, approaching from the southeast. Allied forces. Finally, she'd activated the emergency beacon she'd found on one of the dead reconnaissance soldiers. The signal would have pinged every friendly unit within 50 miles. Someone had finally responded. Sarah stood and moved into the open, waving her arms. The helicopters circled once, confirming the situation, then landed in a storm of sand and noise. 10 soldiers emerged from the birds, weapons ready. A captain led them, a stocky man with weathered features and alert eyes. He took in the scene, the burnt shack, the scattered bodies, the defensive positions, the single woman standing in the middle of it all. Lieutenant Brennan? His voice was professional but surprised. Yes, sir. We received a distress signal. Intelligence said this position was destroyed. It was. Sarah gestured at the wreckage. They hit me last night. 0, 2, 4, 7 hours. Burned everything. The captain looked at the bodies scattered across the sand. How many hostiles? 12 confirmed. 4 in the initial assault team, 8 in the follow-up patrol. And our casualties? None, sir. Just me. The captain stared at her. Then, at the bodies. Then, back at her. You held this position alone? Against 12 trained combatants? Yes, sir. One of the soldiers had been examining the bodies on the ridge. He called out, Captain, these shots are over 800 yards. Perfect placement. Another soldier reported from the burned site. Multiple fighting positions. Pre-planned fields of fire. Whoever set this up knew exactly what they were doing. The captain studied Sarah. How long have you been at this post? 43 days, sir. And you're a designated marksman? Was, sir. I've been doing forward observation for the past 8 months. The captain shook his head slowly. Lieutenant, we thought we were coming to recover a body. Instead, we find this. He gestured at the tactical masterpiece around them. Sarah said nothing. She was exhausted, dehydrated despite the water she'd captured. Her hands had started shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. The captain saw it. Medic, get the lieutenant some water and food. Check her for injuries. A young medic approached, but Sarah waved him off. I'm fine, just tired. That's an order, Lieutenant. Sarah sat down. Let the medic work. Drank the water they gave her. Ate the protein bar they pressed into her hands. Around her, the soldiers documented the scene. Took photographs, collected weapons and identification from the bodies. Secured the perimeter. The captain crouched beside Sarah. We're going to need a full debrief. Command is going to want to know everything about this engagement. Yes, sir. But first, I need to ask, how did you know they'd come back? Why didn't you attempt extraction when the position was compromised? Sarah looked at the burnt shack. They used fire instead of explosives. That meant they wanted to use this position themselves, and they left too clean. Professional work. I knew they'd return to confirm the kill. So you waited for them? Yes, sir. And the follow-up patrol? Same reasoning. When the first team didn't report, they'd send reinforcements. The captain was quiet for a moment. Then, you could have run. No, sir. Not across 50 miles of desert with no water. You could have hidden. They would have found me. So you decided to fight. Sarah met his eyes. I decided to survive. The captain nodded slowly. Well, Lieutenant, you did more than survive. You held a strategic position against a numerically superior force and inflicted 100% casualties. That's... He paused, searching for words. That's exceptional work. Sarah didn't respond. The praise felt hollow. She'd done what was necessary. Nothing more. One of the soldiers approached. Captain, we've completed the initial survey. We count 12 hostile KIA, multiple weapons recovered, and significant intelligence value in their equipment. This was definitely a reconnaissance operation. Mapping our forward positions? Looks that way, sir. The captain stood. All right. Load everything up. We're extracting in 10 minutes. He looked down at Sarah. Can you walk to the helicopter? Sarah stood. Her legs were shaky, but functional. Yes, sir. Good. Let's get you out of here. Sarah took one last look at the burn site, at the shack that had been her home for 43 days. at the desert that had nearly killed her, and then become her ally. She turned and walked toward the helicopter. The shack was nothing but ash and twisted metal, but the defensive line held. Command sent a recovery team the next day to properly secure the site. They found Sarah's fighting positions, her ammunition caches, her tactical planning. They documented everything for the after-action report. The report went up the chain. General officers read it. Someone recommended Sarah for a Bronze Star with Valor device. Someone else suggested the Silver Star. Sarah never heard about any of it. She'd been transferred to a rear position for mandatory debriefing and psychological evaluation. The psychologist asked if she felt traumatized. Sarah said no. Asked if she had nightmares. Sarah said no. Asked if she felt guilt about the men she'd killed. Sarah paused before answering. I feel nothing about them. They came to kill me. I responded appropriately. The psychologist made notes. Recommended 2 weeks of observation. Sarah spent the time cleaning her rifle and studying maps of the region, learning the terrain, understanding the broader tactical situation. On the 14th day, a colonel visited her. Lieutenant Brennan, I've reviewed your record and your recent actions at Outpost Kilo 7. Yes, sir. Command has a proposal. We're establishing a new forward observation network. We need experienced personnel who can operate independently in hostile territory. Personnel who can think tactically and act decisively. Sarah understood. You want me back in the field. Only if you're willing. After what you went through, no one would blame you for requesting reassignment to a safer position. Sarah thought about the desert, the silence, the clarity of purpose, when everything reduced to simple survival. When do I leave? The colonel smiled. 2 days. New position, better equipment. And this time, you'll have backup within 20 miles. I don't need backup. I know, but command insists. Sarah returned to the desert 3 days later. New outpost, new sector, same mission. She set up her position with the same meticulous care she'd learned at Kilo 7. Defensive positions, fields of fire, ammunition caches. This time, she also set up early warning systems, buried sensors along likely approach routes, created fallback positions with cached supplies. She would never be trapped without water again. On her 4th night at the new position, Sarah sat outside and watched the stars. The desert was quiet, peaceful. The temperature had dropped to a comfortable 70 degrees. Somewhere to the north, the war continued. Soldiers fought and died. Commanders planned operations. Politicians negotiated. Sarah didn't care about any of that. She cared about the mission, about holding the line, about doing the job she'd been trained to do. She thought about the first team that had attacked Kilo 7, the ones who'd burned her shack and thought she'd die before sunrise. They'd been wrong about a lot of things. Wrong about the fire breaking her. Wrong about the desert killing her. Wrong about dawn being their moment. Sarah stood and walked back into her outpost. She cleaned her rifle, checked her ammunition, verified her water supply. Tomorrow, she'd continue her observation duties. Watch the valley. Report enemy movements. Maintain the defensive line. It was simple work, essential work, and she was very, very good at it. Outside, the desert wind whispered across the sand. The stars wheeled overhead. Another night in the endless cycle of nights. Sarah settled into her position and closed her eyes. The desert could try to kill her again tomorrow. Tonight, she would rest. Because dawn, the moment when everything became clear, when distances could be measured and shots could be taken with perfect precision, dawn belonged to her. It always had.